Scriptural explanation. As stated above, the common scriptural explanations of anatta focus on conditioned things, because these teachings are presented to ordinary unawakened people and touch upon everyday issues. Furthermore, those things that ordinary unawakened people are able to conceive of as self are limited to conditioned things, sankhara, or limited to the five aggregates. Therefore, the explanations of non-self concentrate exclusively on the five aggregates. This corresponds with the Buddha's words. Monks, whichever ascetics and Brahmins who regard self in various ways, all regard the five aggregates subject to clinging, or a certain one among them. What five? Monks, the uninstructed ordinary person regards form as self, or self as possessing form, or form as in self, or self as in form. He regards feeling as self, perception as self, volitional formations as self, consciousness as self, or self as in consciousness. This way of regarding things thus becomes his fixed belief that I exist. In other words, belief in a self only exists where the five aggregates exist, and exists because of clinging to these five aggregates. As explained by the Buddha, monks, when what exists, by relying on what, by adhering to what, does such a view as this arise? This is mine, I am this is myself. When there is form, monks, by relying on form, by adhering to form, such a view as this arises. This is mine, I am this is myself. When there is feeling, perception, volitional formations, consciousness, by relying on consciousness, by adhering to consciousness, such a view as this arises. This is mine, I am this is myself. At this point, let us examine some of the numerous scriptural explanations of non-self. The Patisambhida Magga defines something as anatta in the sense that it is insubstantial, sarakatena. Insubstantial means to be without essence, to be without a core, and to possess nothing that is truly stable or enduring. Insubstantial means the absence of an essential nuclear self, attasara, which is thought of as a self, atta, an abider, nivasi, an agent, karaka, an experiencer, vedaka, or an autonomous master, sayamvasi. For whatever is impermanent is dukkha. It is unable to prevent its transience or its oppression from rising and falling. How then can it exist as a doer, and so on? Hence the Buddha said, monks, if this physical form, for example, were self, surely it would not be subject to affliction. Note that this definition of non-essence or selflessness includes the absence of a creative role, or a lack of intrinsic control. If one were to possess a stable, enduring self as a core, then one could resist change. One would not be subject to change. Similarly, if one were master over things, one could manipulate possessions according to desire. Reality, however, is not this way. A distinctive feature of the absence of an abiding self is the inability to dominate conditions and their opposition to desire. Note that Buddhadhamma considers even Brahma, God, or whichever supreme creator deity, to exist within the conditioned world, to be confined to the five aggregates, and thus wielding restricted power. In this sense, the commentaries prefer to define anatta as the inability to control, or not subject to control, awa sawa tana tena, or awa sawa tana nato. Likewise, they explain that no one can force formations into subservience, in defiance of cause and effect, by demanding that arisen phenomena not exist, that existent phenomena not age, and that aging phenomena not perish. They quote the Buddha's words, "A person cannot, in regard to physical form, obtain as wished for. May form be this way, may form not be that way. Same with the other aggregates. When one thoroughly examines the nature of all things, one finds that no fixed and permanent self exists, as is implied by giving things particular names. There is merely a natural process, Dhamma Bhavati, a process of conditionality, or a process of materiality and mentality, Khandha Bhavati, which originates from the confluence of manifold constituents. All of these constituents arise and cease in a continual intercausal relationship, both within a single isolated dynamic and within all creation. This being so, we should take note of the four significant points. 1. There is no true enduring self within any phenomenon, existing as an essence or core. 2. All conditioned things arise from the convergence of components. 3. These components continually arise and disintegrate, and are codependent, constituting a specific dynamic of nature. 4. If one separates a specific dynamic into subordinate dynamics, one sees that these two are codependent. The manifestation and transformation of a dynamic is determined by the relationship of its components. The dynamic proceeds without the intervention by a self. No separate self exists, neither an internal enduring self that resists cause and effect and is able to direct the activity according to its wishes, nor an independent external agent. Human beings confer names to many of these assemblies and formations. For example, person, horse, cat, ant, car, shop, house, clock, pen, Mr. Jones and Miss Smith. These names, however, are simply conventional labels established for convenience of communication. The entities do not really exist. They do not have a real self. a separate identity distinct from their collective components. Upon analysis of these entities, what remains is each unit or part with its own specific name. It is not possible to find a self within such entities, no matter how deeply one searches. By giving names to things, one creates a provisional self that is superimposed on the true condition. It is superimposed randomly, without any direct relationship to, control over, or effect on that particular dynamic, except when one clings to the conventional designation. Clinging is then one component of the process. If names are just conventional labels, arbitrarily superimposed, then it is self-evident that they are powerless. When elements convene and manifest as particular forms, we assign agreed upon names to these forms. As long as the components are conjoined, they sustain the particular shape which corresponds to a conventional identity. When the components split up, however, or the surrounding conditions are unsupportive, the form disappears. For example, when temperatures rise above a certain level, ice melts. The entity called ice vanishes, with water remaining. With a further increase in temperature, water evaporates, turning to steam. That entity of water ceases to be. Likewise, when paper is burned, only ashes remain. The entity called paper is no longer found. The dynamics of nature occur in line with cause and effect. They do not obey desire, and they are not influenced by these randomly established identities. They do not obey desire because, speaking accurately, desire does not serve an autonomous self. Desire is one component within a causal process, and it is not the agent that accomplishes a deed. Desire is only able to produce results when it acts as an impetus, affecting subsequent conditions like effort or action, in conformity with cause and effect. A distinct, independent self cannot exist. Were it to exist, it would not be subject to causality, it would be fixed. It would impede the causal flow, rendering all other elements dispensable. Any fluent dynamic would be nullified. Such a self could interfere with and modify conditions, causing a deviation from causality. In truth, however, all conditioned things proceed according to cause and effect. A separate self does not truly exist, either within a dynamic or externally. The only self that exists is the conventional self, which needs to be understood, or else it ends up deceiving and oppressing people. The basic meaning of anatta, that all things arise as a composition of interrelated parts following cause and effect, are void of an enduring self, and are without a fixed creative agent, is confirmed by many references in the Scriptures. For example, just as when a space is enclosed by timber, twine, clay, and thatch, it comes to be called a house, so too when a space is enclosed by bones and sinews, flesh and skin, it comes to be called a body, rupa. Mara asked Vajira Bhikkhuni, who created this being, person? Where is the creator of beings? Where does a being originate? Where does a being cease? Vajira answered, Mara, do you believe in a being? Do you hold such a view? This is purely a mass of formations here, no being can be found. Just as with the combination of various parts, the term wagon and shoes, so too with the 5 aggregates, the conventional term being in shoes. Indeed, there is only dukkha that arises, abides and passes away. Nothing but dukkha comes to be, nothing but dukkha ceases. Mara asked the same question to Sela Bhikkhuni, who answered, "No one fashioned this shape, no one created this being. Dependent upon causes, it has arisen. With the ending of causes, it ceases. Just as seeds, when sown on a field, will sprout, owing to both the nutrients in the soil and the moisture within the seeds, so too these aggregates, elements, and 6 senses arise dependent upon causes and cease with the dissolution of those causes. A collection of soldiers, vehicles, and weapons is called an army. We call a group of buildings, houses, people, and enterprises a city. A hand with fingers placed in a certain position is called a fist. Uncurl the fist, and only a hand with fingers remains. Similarly, when one separates a hand into ancillary parts, then it too no longer exists. One can continue to subdivide, but one will be unable to find any static units or elements. The suttas contain only teachings of materiality and mentality, nama-rupa. There is no mention of a fixed being or person. There are 4 principal definitions of anatta, compiled by the commentators. Although these definitions are normally used in reference to conditioned phenomenon, Buddhadhamma, they also apply to the unconditioned, Buddhadhamma. Something is considered non-self for the following reasons. 1. Shunnyato, because it exists in a state of emptiness. It exists according to its own nature. It is without a self as essence or core, attasara. It is void of a real identity as person, I, him, or her. There is no occupation, agent, or experiencer apart from the causal process, or apart from provisional designations. Things exist independently from their assigned or cherished identities. For example, man, woman, I, you, object A, object B. 2. Asamikato. Because it is ownerless, it does not belong to a person or to self. No separate self exists that possesses phenomena. Phenomena exist according to their inherent conditioned or unconditioned nature. 3. Awasawata nato. Because it is not subject to control, it does not depend on anyone. It is not under anyone's power, and it is not dictated by a self. A related term used is anisarato, translated as not subject to a ruler, not subject to the authority by a controlling self. We have no absolute power over things, we must concur with causes. In some places one finds the term akamakariyato, translated as unable to do as one pleases. Things do not obey desires. The mind of desire cannot dictate things. If one wants things to be a certain way, then one must conform to or bring about the proper causes and conditions. Things depend on causes and conditions, not on someone's power or desire. For example, it is possible to order something that has arisen to disappear, or to not change, or to not deteriorate. For atta pati pato, because it is inconsistent with or oppresses a self. Were a substantial fixed self to exist, it would conflict with phenomena, causing them to deviate from their own inherent nature. Ordinary people can recognize this from examining conditioned phenomena. The causal process of interrelated components is inherently compatible with a separate, autonomous self, which would dictate or interfere with that process. Such an isolated self cannot exist. If it were to exist, a causal dynamic could not occur. The course of events would necessarily follow the dictates of self. Furthermore, the law of causality is intrinsically complete. It does not require a controlling agent to intervene. There are two additional definitions of anatta, which, although included within the 4 points mentioned above, are particularly important and should thus be distinguished. They refer exclusively to conditioned phenomena, highlighting their dynamic nature. 5. Suddha Sankara Punjato or Buddhadhamma Punjato. Things exist purely as a mass of formations, or as a mass of phenomena, Dhamma, that is, materiality, Rupadhamma, and or mentality, Namadhamma. Another term used is Anga Sambharato, meaning that things exist as a composition of subsidiary parts. They arise from the gathering together of such parts. They are not absolute enduring units or entities. There is no real being or person or self. Over and above these components, this definition is already stressed on point 1 above. 6. Yata Pachaya Pavatito. Things exist following causes and conditions. They exist as a collection of interrelated and codependent parts. Things do not follow a person's desires, and no self exists, either as an internal essence or as an external agent, which resists or directs the process. All 4 of the above points include this definition, especially points 3 and 4. To sum up, all things exist according to their own nature. In the case of conditioned phenomena, Sankata Dhamma, they proceed according to specific causes and conditions. If the determinant causes exist, a phenomenon originates in conformity with these causes. If these causes cease, the phenomenon ceases to exist in that way. Things do not obey supplication or desire. They are not entities or things as commonly identified, and they do not belong to anyone. As explained earlier, these definitions of anatta presented here focus on conditioned phenomena, which ordinary people engage with and can learn from. One of the major misunderstandings for people is the belief that a thinker exists apart from thinking, a planner exists apart from volitional, a feeler exists apart from feelings, or an actor exists apart from actions. This misunderstanding has trapped many of the great philosophers, who were therefore unable to realize the truth and be free from the enshrouding influence of self-view. René Descartes, the famous French philosopher, is an example, who, after much consideration, postulated, "I think, therefore I am." The belief in a distinct self or soul is common to unenlightened beings everywhere. This belief seems true and logical through ordinary awareness, but once one thoroughly investigates the premise of self, contradictions appear. People often posed questions about the self to the Buddha. For example, who makes contact, who cognizes, who feels, who craves, who clings, The Buddha answered that these are unsuitable questions, which stem from a false assumption. They are not consistent with reality. Appropriate questions are: what is the condition giving rise to contact? What is the condition giving rise to feeling? What are the conditions giving rise to craving and clinging? Just as thought, intention, desire, and feeling are components of a physical and mental process, so too the experience of a thinker or a designer is a component of this process. All of these components exist in an intercausal relationship. There is simply thought and an experience of a thinker, i.e. a false belief in a thinker. A thinker does not exist arising within a single dynamic. The experience of a thinker is actually a thought pattern. It is one instant in the thought process. The erroneous belief in a thinker arises due to a person's inability to distinguish the related parts, and to distinguish each momentary event within the continuum. At the time of thought there is no experience of a thinker, and at the instant of experiencing a thinker there is no other thought. While thinking of a certain subject, one does not reflect upon a thinker, and while reflecting upon a thinker, one does not think about that previous subject of consideration. Thinking of a subject and experiencing a thinker, thinking of a thinker, are actually different moments of thought, which exist in the same dynamic. The thinker is just a mental fabrication, which then becomes an object for further thought during another instant of time. The fallacy mentioned above results from a lack of thorough attention, ayoniso manasikara, and is classified as one of the 6 views mentioned in the Buddha's teaching. When that unenlightened being attends unwisely in this way, one of the 6 views arises in him. There arises in him the fixed view, as true and established, that I have a self, I do not have a self, I know the self by way of the self, I know non-self by way of the self, I know the self by way of non-self, or else he has some such view as this: it is this self of mine that dictates, feels, and experiences here and there the fruit of good and bad actions. It was mentioned earlier how a name assigned to a particular entity is a contrived and arbitrarily superimposed self, which unless clung to has no relationship to or effect on the causal dynamic, although such a self does not truly exist. Clinging to the idea of self creates problems. This is because the clinging becomes a part of the dynamic, determining other components and affecting the dynamic as a whole. Clinging to a sense of self is an unwholesome factor, since it stems from ignorance. It contaminates other elements of the process, interfering adversely with the causal stream. One effect of clinging is that it produces a conflict within the dynamic, resulting in a feeling of oppression or suffering. People who hold tightly to the conventional self or real self as real are afflicted by this grasping. Those who fully comprehend conventional labels, on the other hand, do not cling to the idea of a self, seeing merely a causal continuum. These people use whichever term is commonly assigned to a particular object, but they can enhance the dynamic as they please, by acting in harmony with its determining factors. They do not allow craving and clinging to oppress them. thus avoiding the consequent suffering. Such people know how to benefit from conventional labels without suffering the harm of attaching to them. Another detrimental effect of clinging to a self is the production of unwholesome mind states known as defilements, kilesa. In particular, these include tanha, craving, selfishness, the lust for gratification, mana, conceit, self-judgment, the yearning for personal power, ditthi, the firm grasping to personal opinions, the stubborn, unyielding belief that one's views represent the truth. These three defilements intensify both internal and external discord. People who do not see through conventional labels cling to randomly established identities as the truth and allow these defilements to dictate their behavior, compounding misery for themselves and others. Those who penetrate the relative truth of conventional labels, however, do not cling to them and are freed from the influence of these defilements. They are not deceived by such thoughts as "this belongs to me, I am this way," or "this is who I am." They conduct their life with wisdom. A clear understanding of conventional labels and action in harmony with causes and conditions as the basis from which true safety and freedom from suffering extends. Another error that tends to entangle people is vacillation from one extreme opinion to another. Some people strictly believe in the self as real and permanent. They think that the self makes up the essence of a human being, and that it is not just a conventional entity. Each person, they say, has a real, stable, eternal self. Even when a person dies, the soul, self, spirit, Atman, Atta continues unchanged. The self does not disappear or disintegrate. Some believe that this soul reincarnates, while others believe that it awaits judgment from the highest God for eternal salvation or damnation. Such views fall under the category of eternalism, sasata ditthi, or sasata vada, the belief that the self or soul is real and everlasting. Another group of people believe that such a self exists, that a person exists as a definite identity, but that this self is temporary. It disintegrates at death. They claim the self breaks apart and ceases. This self is called annihilationism, Ucheda ditthi or Ucheda vada, the belief that the self or soul is impermanent. It exists temporarily and then breaks up and vanishes. Scholars of Buddhist studies may also embrace one of these views if they lack clear understanding. Those who study the law of karma in connection to the round of rebirth, samsara vata, may hold an eternalist view regarding the self as permanent. Those who misapprehend the teachings of anatta, on the other hand, may hold an annihilationist view, believing that nothing exists after death. The common point of misunderstanding for proponents of these two extremes is the belief that a being or person exists as a real, fixed entity. One party believes that this entity is constant and eternal, while the other believes that this entity breaks up and vanishes at death. Besides these two, there is another group with an even more extreme view, believing that the absence of self means that nothing at all exists. If no one exists, then no one experiences results. Therefore, actions have no consequences. Actions are insignificant and there is no accountability regarding actions. Speaking simply, there is no karma. One can divide this last named kind of belief into three categories. One faction believes that actions are meaningless, or that actions bear no fruit. This is called the doctrine of the inefficacy of action, Akiriyaditi or Akiriyawada. Another faction believes that things occur haphazardly by chance, without any causes. This is called the doctrine of non-causality or accidentalism, Hutukaditi or Ahetukawada. The third faction believes that absolutely nothing exists with any value or meaning. This is called nihilism, Nathikaditi or Nathikawada. Since all things exist as a causal continuum originating from the merging of components, there is no self which either endures or disintegrates. In this very instant, no person or self exists. Where can one find an enduring or dissolving self? This teaching negates both eternalism and annihilationism. Since the dynamics of nature consist of interrelated, causally dependent components, how can one claim that nothing exists, or that things occur haphazardly and by chance? The teaching negates the doctrines of nihilism and non-causality. As dynamics change according to inherent causal factors, each agent within a dynamic produces an effect. None is void of effect. Moreover, results ensue without a need for a receiver of such results. Results are intrinsic to the dynamic. Notionally, one can say that the dynamic itself is the recipient. These results are more certain than if a stable self were to exist as the receiver. Since the self could reject unwelcome results, as the law of causality exists, how can one claim that actions are meaningless or have no results? The teaching negates the doctrine of the inefficacy of action. The following passage from the Visuddhimagga corroborate the explanations presented above. Truly, in this world, there is only mentality and matter. Here there is no being or person to be found. This mentality and matter is empty. It is fashioned like an instrument by conditioning factors, just as a mass of instability, dukkha, like grass and sticks. Suffering exists, but no sufferer can be found. Actions exist, but no agent. Nibbana exists, but no one who is quenched. The past exists, but no wayfarer. There is no doer of a deed, or one who reaps the deed's results. Phenomena alone flow on. This is right view. While karma and fruition, vipaka, thus causally maintain their round, as seed and tree succeed in turn, no first beginning can be known, nor in the future round of rebirth, samsara, can an absence of the cycle of karma and fruition be discerned. Adherents of other sects, not knowing this, have failed to gain self-mastery. Asayamwasi, they are dependent on others because of wrong view. They assume a being, sata sanya, viewing it as eternal or annihilated. They adopt the 62 kinds of views, each contradicting the other. The stream of craving bears them on, the mesh of views entangles them, and as the stream thus bears them on, they are not freed from suffering. A disciple of the Buddha, with direct knowledge of this fact, penetrates this deep and subtle void, conditionality. There is no karma in fruition, nor does fruition exist in karma. Though they are empty of one another, no fruit exists without the act. Similarly, fire does not exist inside sunlight, a magnifying glass, or in cow dung used for fuel, nor yet outside them, but is kindled by their conjunction. So neither can the fruit be found within a deed, nor without, nor does a deed still persist in the fruit it has produced. Karma of its fruit is void, no fruit exists yet in an act, and still the fruit is born of karma, dependent on karma. For here there is no creator God, no creator of the realms of births. Phenomena alone flow on, dependent on the marriage of conditions. Natural phenomena arise wholly from causes, are subject to pressure, impermanence, unstable and inconstant. All things arise from other things in mutual dependence. There is no personal or external self within this continuum. Phenomena give rise to other phenomena by the union of causes and conditions. The Buddha taught the Dhamma for the cessation of causes. With the cessation of causes, the cycle vata is broken and revolves no more. The sublime life, brahmacharya, exists to end all suffering in this way. When no being can be found, there is neither annihilation nor eternity. To summarize, the teaching of anatta confirms the following points. It negates both the doctrines of eternalism and annihilationism. It negates the belief in a supreme God who created the world and governs the destiny of human beings, i.e. theistic determinism, Isara Nimitta Vada. It is consistent with the teaching of karma as defined by Buddhadhamma, at the same time negating the following doctrines. The claim that actions have no results, doctrine of the inefficacy of action, the doctrine of past action, determinism, Pubekata Vada, for example of the Niganta order, Jainism, the doctrine of karma involving a soul or a caste system, for example Hinduism, the claim that things occur by chance without causes, accidentalism, and the doctrine of nihilism. It reveals the supreme state, the final goal, Paramadhamma, of Buddhism, which differs from the goal of religions that profess a soul, Attavada.